I think it's just so interesting to kind of frame the current religious persecution happening in China as an extension of sort of this centuries old kind of war against spirituality that was kind of growing in Europe. But let's talk about modern times. Over the past year, the coronavirus pandemic has been going on. During this, has religious persecution gone worse?
I think yes, for many reasons. Let me just summarize a few. First of all, we all know now it's a fact. It's not a conspiratorial theory that for good or for bad, the new coronavirus came out of China. Uh, and we know that there have been delays in informing the general public and international organization, or even that some international organization like the World Health Organization uh, coped with the orders coming from Beijing in order to slow down the information process on the coronavirus. This ended up in many more victims of the virus, and this is the first point. Going in detail into religious persecution, while the coronavirus was covered up by the Chinese regime and its allies, the machine of the religious persecution in many places in China didn't stop because I mean they just used the COVID problem to implement some more restriction on people, to stop religious groups from gathering. They use the COVID as an excuse. And then there is a second point when the COVID was, they could not silence the news anymore. China, they tried to use COVID for their own good, saying, all of a sudden we had a problem with the COVID, but in China, good that we stopped it before the virus could spread all over the country. So we are the one who defeated the COVID, the virus. So let's export the Chinese lesson all over the world. At that point, many countries, many people in different countries regarded China as a savior. So they suddenly forgot that China is not the most democratic regime of all the world, and they suddenly forgot that religious freedom is systematically denied in China. That was, a very big gift to the regime, who could even be more violent in the repression of religious groups, because no one was paying attention that time. They didn't pay attention enough before the COVID, but the COVID gave, to many people the excuse to say this is not the priority. The priority is COVID, 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 only COVID, which of course is a problem, but it's not. Evil still goes on beyond COVID, and one of the face of evil is the religious persecution in China, and people suddenly forgot all these, and China came out as the champion of the liberation from the COVID. Sometimes it's even still presented as such today, when we know that they were guilty of covering up the development and the spreading of this virus. So yes, persecution is still going on. It's probably more bitter than before, just because people is not paying attention.
They
Would
basically used it as a cover.
Yes, I think so. I would say yes.
Marco, you are in Italy right now. How would you say that your government has, because it's been hit pretty hard by COVID, how would you say that your government has responded to the Chinese Communist Party saying that, we're the savior and things like that?
Yes, as a director in charge of Bitter Winter, I always underline that we don't take any political um, stand as a magazine. Of course, I have my own opinion, very strong opinion in policy, politics, religion, and so on and so forth. But as Bitter Winter, we don't address that topic. But I don't want to avoid your question because I can turn the answer. I can craft my answer remaining just on the question of religious freedom, which is the proper duty of Bitter Winter. With this premise, I would say that the Italian government has been too soft on reminding China that beyond giving us some technical equipment to supposedly to fight COVID or some thousands of masks that we, by the way, paid in advance. My government has been too soft in not reminding China that the first of all human rights is right. So people should not be killed, tortured, or abused in any way to advance no kind of ideology or policy. Plus, the second human rights and the first political right is religious freedom. So how can China claim to be the savior, or how China could be described as the savior from COVID if it violates these basic human and political rights? My government is very tied to, for political reason, at some extent also for ideological reason, to the present regime in Beijing. So they will not say one word against them, and actually they didn't. So China is always described as the regime who's doing the best for the citizens, quoting the COVID question as an example. But of course, reality is much more complicated, and they just shy away, and my government choose not to see. There are many appeals, denunciations, documents at the international level coming from the US and some other international organizations that are no excuse to be so shy in face of the big brother China. Of course, Italy is a small country. In face of China, we have a national public debt, which is so high, it's skyrocketing. We have economic problems. So at some extent, the Italian ruling class and the present government see China as an help to this problem. But this is, again, no excuse. We're speaking of basic violation of basic human rights and even torture, killings, and these kind of things. There is no excuse, I think.
I think it's interesting looking at this in the context of what you said, China as the savior, because, from a religious point of view, it's like now Italy and other countries are looking towards this atheist entity as the savior, almost as if like ideologically, like, we should adopt what, like not only take their medical equipment and masks or that, we have to buy from them, but also to implement their ideas on how to contain the spread. Because, of course, believing that what the Communist Party says about, policies to contain COVID work, because they work in China, if you believe the official statistics. I mean, only 4,000 people have died in China. And therefore, we should adopt every measure that China says we ought to adopt.
Well, Matt, you actually bring up a good point, because a lot of the discussion happening in the United States is in dealing with the coronavirus, places of religious worship. And there is a big pushback against places of worship saying that, they should be shut down because they're spreading the coronavirus, which is, I'm sure, a policy the Communist Party would also be very happy promoting.
Places of worship like Walmart?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good and big point. There are philosophers and sociologists who, even before COVID, the COVID crisis and the pandemics, they pointed at the China model as the solution for the future in terms of policy and politics, the solution to the great big question on sustainability of modern states and all the problems with democratic society and this and that, and they kind of envision a technocratic model based on the Chinese regime, where they say, ideology, Marxist ideology, is not per se very strong in China anymore. They use the name, they use the framework, but it's not real communism. It's a kind of social democratic, technocratic model in which everyone is being taken care of by the state, so they don't need to worry about anything. They even can get rich when the state says you can get rich if you don't put too many questions, if you do what I want, if you enjoy the liberty I give you. It's not a God-given liberty, but it's a CCP-given liberty. So there are Western philosophers, sociologists, even politicians who think that this Chinese model could be the solution to the modern democratic problem. COVID came into the scenario and added to that in the way you were saying. Look at China. China was so good and so able to resolve quick the COVID problem. And this is, by the way, what they say. They tell us we don't have any means to verify what the regime says, but many Western corners took that at face value and say, yes, okay, yeah, Beijing was very practical. They solved the problem. So let's adopt that model. And of course, as you were correctly pointing out, the big enemy of this new technocratic Chinese model again is religion, organized religious churches, movements, whatever, because they do just the opposite. First of all, they don't obey to this atheistic God. Ultimately, they have another God. They have another superior being to whom they look. So they cope with the load of the state, but if the state gives them liberty. So there is some tension here that becomes a threat in the eyes of these technocratic Chinese apologists. Plus, big groups, churches, movements, of course, they are the one who nurture the virus, because we know that social distancing and all of that and repressing liberty of movements like they did in China is the key to defeat the virus. And churches and groups, religious groups, just do the opposite. We have seen examples of this outside of China, when huge, large religious groups were accused of being nurturing the virus because they had big gatherings. There is no proof that this is true, but it's very suitable to the ideological language of these people who say, big gatherings equal to religious groups, equal to spreading the virus. It's very useful for people who see religion as an enemy. I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial. There are facts who can document this. It happened in Korea. It happened at some extent in Taiwan, and the whole idea, even in the West, to shut down churches just before supermarkets goes back to the idea churches, groups, religious movements are of the problems as to the COVID. So let's get rid of them first, and then we can discuss the COVID problem. It originates in the ideology of the materialistic regime, like the communist regime in China, but it easily goes beyond China, being taken by some technocratic ideologues and applied to some Western society with some differences. But this is what we are facing now in countries like mine or in the West, where the problem is shut down churches before doing anything else, because COVID is lies in churches. This is becoming a common mentality, which is very dangerous. I think you could even not be a religious person, but when you start thinking that religion is the problem, you mean that the most intimate of the human soul is the problem. So you need to repress that in order, supposedly, a democratic society. I don't believe that this is democracy.